it was a 14-year-old girl that was killed in the Trevo section of town, and it was never solved. And I said, that's news to me. I said, I'd love to see it. And then, of course, at the time it was 2002. That case, we had a computer system there that didn't exist in '84. So the case, I couldn't look it up in the computer. She said, I have to, get the case files. And, I bugged her relentlessly until she got them all for me. And she dug them out. And I started reading it. And I took it home with me that night. I read it cover to cover multiple times. And I saw a lot of familiar names in it, guys that were senior to me. And I just...
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cold Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you?
Ray, how are you tonight?
Good, sir. Today we have an amazing guest, Chris McMullen. Chris currently serves as a lieutenant for the Bucks County Sheriff's Department and was previously a detective with the Ben Salem Township Police Department. Small world. Jim was also there.
Yeah.
And as a police officer for the Philadelphia Police Department. Chris is also the president of the Cold Case Initiative and a card-carrying member of the Screen Actors Guild. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks you. Good to see you guys.
Great to have you here, Chris. And actually, you started as a Wildwood, New Jersey police officer before Philly, right?
That's true. I was what they call a seasonal officer in North Wildwood. I was a dispatcher, and then I became what they call a Class 2 officer. And that was 89 and 90. And then after that, I got hired by Philadelphia.
Little transition from that small beach town to the fifth or sixth largest city in the country,
yes,
right?
Yes. Big difference.
Chris, what district were you in with Philly PD?
I was in the 9th district.
Oh, okay.
At Center City?
Yes, it was the building. I think the building I was in is now gone, but at the time it was at 20th in Pennsylvania.
Central Detectives is there too, I believe.
Yes,
right.
I've been in there a few times over the years. So what was it like going from North Wildwood PD to Philly? Did you go through the academy again? I assume you did.
I did. I had to go through the academy twice that year, and the Cape May County Academy was physically was more demanding than Philly. I mean, it was really tough, and it was 6 days a week. And but I was in great shape by the time I started the Philly Academy that fall. So, wish I was in that shape now.
I bet you came out near the top of your class, because usually people that have gone to one academy came out do pretty well in the Philly Academy. I
did okay. I didn't make valedictorian. I remember there was another guy that did that, but I did all right. I never had any issues.
Real quick, I went through the State Police Academy with a childhood friend, went to St. Helena's Grade School, Cardinal Doherty High School, Penn State. We were both hired at Ben Salem PD in 1976, and we went to the State Police Academy in Hershey for our training. Chris, since you brought it up, they needed 2 valedictorians, one for the party the night before graduation and one for the graduation itself. I was chosen for the party the night before with the husbands and the graduates, their spouses, whatever, and Ray Geary was the next day. 2 Ben Salem guys did well, and now we're talking to, that was the beginning of my career. I only put 11 years in, and for the record, I left in 87, and you came in 91-ish?
Ben Salem, 92. Philly, 90 to 92, and then Ben Salem, August of 92, I started.
So we never technically crossed paths in the Ben Salem PD, but I know there's some good work being done after I left. Your name surfaced a few times, and lo and behold, we're friends now, and all that entails.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you started in 76, that's about when the seed was being planted for me that I wanted to go into law enforcement. I was 6 at the time, but.
Well, I was a young teenager when I started. I was so special. So I'm not that much older than you, pal.
But Jim, I'm not really surprised that they chose you as valedictorian for the
thank
party.
you, Ray. Ray, this is what's known, Chris, this is what's known as the setup.
No, just the party aspect, Jim. That's what I figured that was perfect for you. That was perfect for you. And Chris, you know what? I would be surprised if you and I didn't chew some of the same dirt down in Center City, because we were getting our socks knocked off
bank robberies
when I transferred in, and bank robberies, especially in Center City. So we probably crossed paths and didn't even know it.
Probably. I remember chasing a lot of bank jobs back then. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
There were a few of them in Ben Salem too over the years. Certainly the 11 years I was there, and I'm sure a few when you were there too.
Yeah,
it's a whole different breed of person, by the way.
Yeah.
Bank robbers. They're a whole different breed of criminal.
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, we did talk a little bit about your early career, and you mentioned something about planting the seed. But what made you get into law enforcement? We all have our own special story.
Yeah, it goes back to when I was a kid. My grandmother had a home down in North Wildwood, New Jersey, like we were talking about. And coincidentally, her neighbor was the North Wildwood Police Department. Literally, her house, a fence, and the police department's parking lot. And I would sit on the patio when I was a kid, and I would watch the officers go in and out a lot. I think it was around 1977. I was riding my bike, and I fell right in front of the house, and these two officers were either they were pulling in or pulling out of the driveway. They saw me fall and they got out and they helped me up. And they were talking to me and I was standing there and, they had the car door open and the radio was crackling. And I was just in awe. I said, that is so, and it just really amazed me. And I kind of got bit by the bug then. And then every summer I would watch them and, they would always say hi to me. They knew me. And so when I was about 19 years old, I applied to work there and that was how it started.
Some of us ran from those cops back in North Wildwood days.
I may have run too.
Not me, Chris. Not me. Back in those days, I was working in the bar as a bouncer at the Red Garter.
The Red Garter up in Anglesey. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Anglesey, North Wildwood.
Yeah.
Right across from Cozy Morley.
Cozy Morley.
Which is not there anymore. And I think I might have thrown Jim out once or twice.
I was practicing my valedictorian speech. You got upset.
I loved Cozy Morley. I saw his show several times when I was younger.
Yeah, he was good.
Funny guy.
On the way to Cape May.
Yep, on the way to Cape May. Love Cozy. There's a nice statue of him down there where Club Avalon used to stand, I think.
Yep. Yep. So North Wildwood, what happens? You wind up in Philly after you leave North Wildwood.
Yeah, I was looking for full-time work. And at that point, I was 20 years old, and I had applied to the city, and I also had applied to some Bucks County departments. When the city hires somebody, they might hire 100 at a time or a large number and fill a class. Where some of the suburban departments might hire 2 or 3 at a time. And Philly called first, and I wanted to work, so I took the job.
What was it like? What were some of the good cases? I mean, were you just running the streets? Were you on last out? What were your shifts like?
I was in 2 squads, so I wasn't on last out. I was 2 weeks of day work and then 2 weeks of 4 to 12s. And like you said, there was a lot of bank robberies. I remember one job, I believe it was on a Monday morning, and the alarm kept tripping, and it was before business hours. And a couple times, we went out there and it appeared to be, property was secure. We didn't see anything. And then the alarm tripped again. And then eventually we realized that there was employees in there and they were all wearing handcuffs. I think it was around 16th and Arch, somewhere in that vicinity. But apparently there was, if I recall, and this is 30 plus years, but I think it was actually a security guard that was hired to rob the bank, actually, or to guard the bank, actually robbed it. And he had handcuffs, and he had these big handcuffs that our keys wouldn't unlock. I remember the fire department had to come out and cut them off of the bank employees. So
I remember that, Chris.
You do?
I do remember that.
Yeah.
I do remember that. Yeah.
Okay, so we did shoot the same dirt. Yeah.
Yep. So I was out on that one, and I remember we tied that into the Hilltop Gang, which was a gang out of West Philadelphia.
Okay.
That it was a bunch of rappers.
Oh.
And, it was some of the same rappers that associated with Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff. Although Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff didn't have anything to do with bank robberies, they all ran in the same circle as far as rapping.
No kidding. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I remember when we were we were cutting the cuffs off of some of the employees. I remember it may have been the manager. It was a male employee, and he told us which way the guy went. So we were going to, start going that way. Because I think the bank was like, it was at the ground floor of a bigger building. And he kept telling us, you better get your guns out, guys. He's got a really big gun. He was terrified, But, obviously he was gone by the time we got on scene.
Interesting.
So when I was in Ben Salem, there were a few Philly officers that came up. Some with a few years on, some with 10 or 15. You had, about a year and a half, 2 years? Your application was already in Ben Salem PD? All right. And so Ben Salem calls you, you weigh all your options, financial, commute, all those type things, and you make a decision.
Exactly. Yeah. I had taken the test, and applied and never heard anything for quite a while. And I kind of wrote it off. And then I got a letter in the mail, asking me to come in for an interview. And it was, an interview in front of a panel of chiefs. And so I went. And, at the time, Frank Friel was the director. And although I didn't know Mr. Friel, I knew of him. And I didn't think I did that well. I kind of walked out thinking I bombed that. They're never going to call me. But then I got a phone call, and then they wanted me to, take a physical. And, it started just, so I said to myself, if, I'm going to keep going with this. And if they offer me the job, I'm going to take it. And it happened.
2 questions. How did your colleagues at Philly PD take it? You're flying the coop, or you're abandoning them, or were they patting you in the back? Good move.
Nobody had anything negative to say. Everyone was, congratulations, good luck. There was a guy I used to partner with a lot. Still talk to him to this day. His name is Tevin Garrett. He and I were partners. We doubled up together a lot and wrote a lot. And he was a little, kind of upset about it. And, and I was too. I mean, I missed working with him. But like I said, 30 plus years later, we still talk. But I don't regret going, because I would have never been able to have worked the cases that I worked had I stayed. So I think, it was the better move for me.
You didn't need a yet third police academy, right?
Correct.
You were sanctioned through
Philly
PD.
Correct. Yeah. So I was okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I remember a few of those officers coming on, and some of them had attitudes coming out of Philly, and some of them came like to retire in place. Some of the ones that put 10 or 15 years in, but we got a few younger ones, and they were more full of that piss and vinegar, as we used to say.
Yeah.
So, and I'm trying to think if anyone came after you from Philly.
Definitely some did. Not for a long time, though. I mean, now probably 40% of that department is probably ex-Philly guys. But
oh, really?
Yeah, there's a lot now. But when I went up, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that came from Philly for probably at least another decade after I did. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. It was quite a while.
We can move ahead here, but Chris, for our listeners and viewers, and we know this here, I mean, FBI has its sort of operating procedures, large state police, large city PDs. What can you say, kind of summarizing your career, for a couple years in Philly, and then to, we'll say, a small to mid-sized department, which was Ben Salem? It was about 100 sworn then, give or take, right?
Yeah. Back then, yeah. Back then, I don't even think there was 100. Now they're well over 100. But I think back then, I think I was number 42. I was the newest addition, and I think I was number 42 in seniority. So there still wasn't that. But it's more than doubled since I started in size.
Yeah, it was definitely in the 80s when I left. In a few words, summarize a big city police department, small to medium-sized police department.
The big difference that I noted right out of the gate was the amount of involvement that a patrolman, a street cop, had in doing an investigation. I was used to, if anything happened that was, a felony that was going to go to central detectives, we would write the 48. Maybe we would write a long form if it was a robbery or something like that. And then we would take it inside, give it to a detective, and we'd go back out on the street, and that was that. They might take a statement from us, but, we weren't doing anything investigatory wise after that. And, I remember when I was in Ben Salem, I was maybe there, a week, and I was working last out when I started, and the guy I was riding with, we wound up making a burglary arrest. I was breaking into a warehouse, and, he told me, he said, you gotta write the criminal complaint. I'd never written a criminal complaint in my life. I didn't know how to do it, but so it was a big difference that, we were typing up the charges. We would do interviews, we had to get them to the judge on time to be arraigned and that sort of thing. So it was much more in-depth, hands-on process.
Yeah. And that's how I started. And I picked up some of those skill sets early on, which I was very glad that I did. And I remember some Philly cops coming in, even with, 10 or 15 years under their belt, whatever they did, like to vest their pension back then. I forget how that worked, but we'd have to kind of reteach them a lot of that. It's still Pennsylvania. It's just, a couple miles north of the Philly border, but it was a different PD and different environment in many ways, as you know.
Yeah, things were just done a lot differently.
So, Chris, you You started working as a detective. How long did it take you to get to that rank up in Ben Salem?
I got promoted to detective in January of 2000, just after my 30th birthday. So it was about 7 years I was a street cop. I was, on the road for about 5 years on the last out squad, and then I actually was involved in a shooting, and then I wound up going to they had a community policing unit, and I kind of wanted a little bit of a change. It was good. I was doing a lot of things with the community, like problem-oriented policing. I was a DARE instructor and things like that. And then I had tested for a detective, and I did make the list. I came out rock bottom on the list. I just made it, between the oral board and then the written test. My grades were nothing to write home about, but I made the list. So.
And then a few people promoted ahead of you, and then you wound up eventually getting it.
Yeah, so when you made the list would start ticking after the first promotion off of it, and it was good for 18 months. So, people were getting promoted, and then people were retiring, and then, it was down to within a few weeks, and there was 2 people on the list, and obviously I was last, so there was somebody ahead of me, and I figured I'm not going to get it. But actually, the officer ahead of me, his name was Herb Laskow, and he got hired by the FBI. So I think I was happier than him that he was going to the FBI, but he accepted that job. And I think there was maybe literally a week to 10 days left before the list expired. The director at the time, Steve Moran, he pushed it through and he got me promoted. And I still thank him for that to this day.
Yeah, we've had other guests on, and I'm trying to think, it may have been Charlie Jardines, my friend from NYPD. Bank Robbery Task Force. And I don't think in New York they take a competitive test. It's different there. But in a lot of smaller departments, and when I was at Ben Salem, obviously you take a written test to get hired, and there's an oral examination too, like you went through, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And then, when you want to put in for detective, corporal, sergeant, whatever the next rank is, you have to sit down and take a written test. And it's proctored by, sometimes people outside the department.
Yeah.
You may take it in the high school. You don't even take it like in the PD. I mean, that could change over the years. But and then the oral exams are not people from your own PD.
Correct.
They bring in most cases, they bring in executives from other police departments, and they do the interviews. So there's allegedly no nepotism. It's kind of quantitative, certainly from the written test. And they give you books to study, and you can, cram. Some people study, some don't. Yeah, I made sergeant there and detective. I came out on top of the list, and I did take sergeant because it's a 10% pay raise, where detective is only 5%. Yet detectives make more overtime. So in the long run, being a detective, you tend to make more money. So
yeah, I remember shortly after I made
that similar plan.
Yeah, shortly after I made detective, they gave a sergeant's exam, and I didn't bother taking it. I passed up on it and a lot of people criticized me over that. And I said, listen, I just got this position. I want to learn it. I want to do one thing and do it well. And honestly, I stayed that rank for the duration of my career, and I loved it. I have no regrets about that at all.
Well, the stories you're going to share with us, and certainly a book you read, but also wrote, is a testament to that. So, yeah, so you're walking your detective. Is there a couple cases early on that were kind of noteworthy and really tested you and got you kind of going to that next level, or someone you tried to trick you or lie to you about something? I think we all have those early cases, and then you learn a lot from it as a building block.
I did. When I first became a detective, I was still, I was basically a patrolman. I was a rookie detective, if you will. And, like I said, I never had really gotten a whole lot of experience doing interviews and things like that. I mean, a lot of times I was present for them, but it was usually the guy that was senior to me, or it was a detective I was sitting with that was taking the lead. And I wasn't really that confident about it, and it took a lot of work at it, schooling, failed attempts, mentoring from older guys, until I finally built up the confidence and started doing it. And, over time, I became very comfortable doing it. In fact, I enjoyed doing it. But I remember there was a guy that robbed a store in the Chamonix Mall, one of the department stores. And it started out as a retail theft. He was just what they call a door hit. He had a handful of clothes and he was going for the door. And when they stopped him, he pulled a gun on them. And they had some pretty good video of him. we were having similar incidents happen in various locations. And finally, I was able to identify him and got him, to willingly come in for an interview. And I remember just laying it all out to him and telling him, like, this is you, and I know you did this. And he went for it. And I wound up closing multiple robberies in one interview. And I remember I was very proud of myself after that. That was, I was able to close a lot of cases.
And of course, you read him his Miranda rights, so nothing got kicked out that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a whole false confession industrial complex now. I'm hearing about in the court systems, and you're still in the law enforcement, of course, Chris, but I'm dealing from an expert perspective. Some as rock solid as a case as you just described, with video, all that kind of stuff, a confession. Nowadays, they just throw that stuff out. Oh, well, look, he was coerced. The investigator left out the word "the" when reading him, his Miranda warnings. So this disqualifies everything. But it sounds like back then, that whole kind of complex thing wasn't developed as it is today.
You know what I always bothered me about the Miranda cards? They were those tiny little cards. So, and you would check it off and you would read it verbatim, and then you would always get the individual to sign it. And then what I would do is I would take that and I would put it on the copy machine and Xerox it on letterhead so that it was, a regular size piece of paper that I would put in a case file. And then I would put the original card into evidence, because so many times I heard horror stories that the yellow card got lost in a case file. So that was always my way to make sure that the Miranda warning card was always preserved.
There's a little trick you learned early on, and it obviously worked for you.
Very smart.
So, that worked well.
Looking at some of the cases you work, Chris, was there a lot of homicide cases that would come across your desk up in Ben Salem?
We had a fair amount of homicides. I mean, certainly not like we were getting in the city, or that Philly would get, but there was, and when we had them, you were knee deep in it, because there was only a handful of detectives. I had been at homicide scenes in the city, and, also as a patrolman in Ben Salem. But I remember the first homicide I had in Ben Salem where I was the lead investigator in the AFI, and it happened at a Firestone tire shop right on Street Road at Humeville Road. And it was workplace violence. It was one of the employees shot and killed the manager. They were having some type of dispute. And, I never realized just, how much, work went into it until you're actually doing it. But I remember that and I remember it was a trial by jury, and we did get a murder one conviction out of it. It was a terrible case, but and we had, what bothered me was that we had, for Ben Salem being a suburb, we had a good amount of unsolved cases, of cold cases. And that came to my attention around spring of 2002. And I had surgery on my knee. So I was in a cast, and I was allowed to come back to work, in a cast on crutches on light duty. So I could sit at my desk, I could type, I could make phone calls, but I wasn't allowed to go out into the field. I wasn't allowed to drive a company car, and I couldn't go to scenes or anything. And I'm sure you remember Lois Kurgan.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was my sergeant in the detective division in CID. And she mentioned to me one day, she said, well, why don't you take a look at the Rowan case? And I didn't know what the Rowan case was. I said, well, what's that about? And she told me, she said, it happened back in 1984. It was a 14-year-old girl that was killed in the Trevo section of town, and it was never solved. And I said, that's news to me. I said, I'd love to see it. And then, of course, at the time it was 2002. That case, we had a computer system there that didn't exist in 84. So the case, I couldn't look it up in the computer. She said, I have to, get the case files. And, I bugged her relentlessly until she got them all for me. And she dug them out. And I started reading it. And I took it home with me that night. I read it cover to cover multiple times. And I saw a lot of familiar names in it, guys that were senior to me. And the next day I came to work and I said, I think this is a solvable case. I said, I would really like to work on this case. And they didn't tell me no, but I don't think they really took me seriously. It was her and Captain Robinson at the time. And you know, they never said no, so I kept the case. But, you know, I remember Lois said, you know, you're going to have to keep up with your current cases. And I said, I will. But I don't like loose ends, first of all. I never liked loose ends. But I just thought to myself, you know, as busy as Ben Salem can be for a suburban town, we shouldn't have an unsolved case like this. And I wanted to take another stab at it. So, you know, I reopened the case, and literally for about the first year, all I did was educate myself on the case. I really didn't do anything proactively. I would read it, and then I would make a list of people that were involved and try and find out if, you know, are they still living? What part of the country are they living in? And then, you know, as time went on, I had a friend, I still have him, he's retired now, but my friend Mike Mosniak, who at the time was a county detective working for the district attorney. And Mike and I go way back, and I had run into him one day and we were talking, and I brought the case up, and it really piqued his interest as well. And he said he would, you know, be interested in working in it with me. And then, so at the time, Steve Moran was the director, and he approved it, that, you know, I could partner up with the DA's office on it. Mike and I worked it really hard for a couple of years. We did it. We re-interviewed everybody except the prime suspect, because we weren't sure where he was. He was somewhere in Florida at the time. Ultimately, and, you know, I'm fast forward. I mean, it took us 13 years to solve that case. We didn't make an arrest until September of 2015, and that was really with District Attorney Jennifer Shorn, who also, after I showed her the case file and after she had the time to read it, she agreed that it needed to be solved and that it was solvable. So we put it into grand jury. We did an investigative grand jury on it. And
this is Bucks County, Pennsylvania, by the way. You're obviously Ben Salem Police, which is part of Bucks County,
part of Bucks County, yeah. And I remember talking to the original investigators, two of the lead detectives on that. I'm sure you remember Detective Rowan, Detective Kazarik, who at the time he was a sergeant. And I remember I spoke with them a lot, and somebody, Terry Lockman. I remember Dave Rowan always said to me, there was a guy involved in that case named Bobby Sanders, and he said Bobby Sanders is the key to that case. And he was right. He was absolutely right. And, you know, we got him into grand jury, and, you know, ultimately told a version of events that he had never told before, which, you know, that he was at George Shaw's apartment on the evening of August 3rd, 1984, which is when Barbara vanished, and that he saw her in the apartment, and that they were in there getting high, shooting meth, and that George took Barbara into another part of the house, and then the next time Bobby saw her, that she was, you know, deceased in another room. Eventually, we went to Florida and we arrested George Shaw, and about another 2 years of pretrial motions before we actually had a trial. And it wound up being a bench trial. He didn't want to have a jury trial, but and we got a conviction. Unfortunately, we got a third-degree conviction, not first-degree, although I, in my heart of hearts, believe it was a first-degree case. We just couldn't prove it.
Which means there was intent to kill this young woman.
Yes. And or that, and even if it, or, you know, second degree, that in that he committed the homicide while committing another felony, in this case, possibly a sexual assault. But he got sentenced to, you know, I think it was a maximum of 29 and a half years. But I think it was the judge that said it best, you know, justice delayed is justice denied. But, you know, at least, I mean, he walked around free for 31 years. So I was very happy, and I know the Rowan family was very happy that, you know, he finally was made to answer for that. I mean, I just gave you 13 years of investigation in 4 minutes. I mean, it was a lot, but the case, you know, it meant a lot to me, and it took a lot out of me, that case.
Well, Chris, both of us have a backstory to that case, and I remember being a detective sergeant there in '84, but I was on the bad boy list. Anyone reads my Journey to the Center of the Mind book too, you'll see how that happened. And that case came in. I was technically the supervisor of the detectives, but there was a lieutenant that was kind of running the show then. So I was kind of kept out of that case. I always wondered if I was allowed to be one of the investigators, maybe things could have gone differently. But also there was a camp around there. Didn't you tie into me or tell me this story that you went to the same camp where her body was found right in the area when you were a little kid?
It's a very strange story. So yeah, There was a summer camp in the Chamonix Valley section of Ben Salem called Cherokee Day Camp. And I spent many summers there. My first summer was 1980, and I went every summer through the summer of 84. I still lived in Northeast Philadelphia at the time. Every day I would get picked up on by a school bus, literally, and myself and a group of other kids, and they would take us up to Cherokee Day Camp. You'd spend a day, and then they drive you home. Coincidentally, the route that, I lived down in Northeast Philly in Mayfair. So the bus would go right up the boulevard, up Roosevelt Boulevard, past Nabisco. You could smell the cookies. And we'd make a left on Old Lincoln Highway and take it to Bristol Road and make a right and go behind the Chamonix Mall. Barbara's family and George Shaw, the defendant in the case who was convicted, they both lived on Old Lincoln Highway. So my bus would go right by both of their homes and then make a right on Bristol Road. And right behind the Chamonix Mall, there's a road called North River Drive, and it was down North River Drive where Barbara's remains were found. Now, they weren't found it was 13 days. She vanished August 3rd. They found her August 16th. And there were kids that went to summer camp that were locals that lived in the area. And there was talk about, the girl that vanished. I don't remember a lot of it, but I didn't remember it right away, but it's funny how it came back to me, and I'll get to that point. So fast forward, a couple decades later, and I'm reading through the case file, and the detectives had, written that on such and such a date, it was after Barbara's body had been found, that they went to Cherokee Day Camp to speak to an employee there. And the employee was a maintenance guy there. As I'm reading this, I'm remembering, I actually remember. I remember because, when the detectives came in, I think at the time they were driving a Diplomat. I think that was the CID car of choice back then. And
you're right.
And the main office at the camp had a PA system. So whenever they wanted to get a hold of somebody, this before the days of beepers and cell phones, they would just get on the PA system. So-and-so report to the office. And we all knew that it was cops there, but we didn't know why they were there. And we were being typical insensitive kids, like somebody's getting busted. And then when they called that particular employee's name to the office, we all figured, well, the cops are here for him. So we started, dragging his name through the mud. So-and-so's getting busted. And then I remember one of the staff kind of came over and really tore into us and told us to knock it off and said, they're here because he saw that little girl the day she disappeared. And it turned out that employee, his sister, lived right next door to George Shaw, who was, the one that killed Barbara Rowan. So, and I'm reading this. This is years later, I'm reading this, and I remembered that. And I said, wow, I actually remember hearing, now it's coming back to me. I remember hearing about this case when I was 14 years old, because I was the same age as Barbara Rowan. So it was really strange that, now in my adult life, I'm trying to solve that case. Small world. So
on a cold case, it's a very small world. Did that ever come up in, I'm assuming you testified at the trial. Did that ever come up and cross the defense attorney trying to, well, where were you on the day the girl went missing? Anything like that?
I don't think that came up. No.
Hey, Ray, you're laughing. Would you rule that out?
Well, no, I would, but he was probably about 8 or 9 years old at the time.
I was 14. So, I was the same age as her.
Yeah, 14, same age. Okay.
Yeah, but
here's the thing, Chris, and I don't think our audience realizes just what you did. When you look at a cold case, and both Jim and I know this because we've looked at these, and I've actually started a cold case program at my university that starts this September, where there's going to be students working with police departments, or like Chester County, Delaware County, state police, working on these cold cases. So I have to ask you, a lot of our audience doesn't realize that when you're looking through these case files, how many banker boxes were there?
A dozen.
And that's small. That's small.
Yeah.
When you think. So there's 12 banker boxes with documents in that you have no idea what's in them.
And they're faded.
No idea
they're faded. They're musty. They're dusty. They're not always in the correct chronological order. Honestly, they're kind of a mess. They're not, because they've sat and been shelved for years. Yeah, that's what I mean. I took that first year just to really get organized and just try and learn about the case. I mean, I knew I was going to try and solve it, and I didn't know if we'd ever succeed. That was one of the things. I never contacted the Rowan family for two reasons. One, because nothing ever came up that I wanted to ask them, but I never contacted them and said, I want to let you know I'm looking at this case. And I've taken some heat for this, but I didn't want to give them a false sense of hope. Maybe I should have, maybe I shouldn't. I didn't, because I had, I didn't know if we were going to succeed. And, I say we, because there was absolutely no way the case would have been solved without Detective Mosniak and Jennifer Shorn. They were and then we had a lot of other help too. If the two of them hadn't stepped up and done it with me, I don't think we would have succeeded. I still remember, after we made an arrest, we were in Florida, and we said, well, this is going to hit the, in probably 24 hours or so, this is going to hit the news, and we didn't want the family to get blindsided. So we called the Rowan family that evening. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And Mike did the phone call, and Mrs. Rowan answered the phone and told her who he was. And, I could hear, his end of the conversation. And, I could hear her, talking through the phone. And she had a little bit of a pause, and she said, "Are you calling me about my daughter?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And she said, "I've been waiting 31 years for this." And that, I will never forget, that made it worth it.
Yeah, but Chris, I think that's unbelievable. And that's so great to bring closure. But if we sit here, and I'm going to say to you, because I'm a regular guy and I have no idea, how in the hell did you know where to start? You're looking at 12 boxes. How did you even start? Where did you start? I mean, you got 12 boxes. What do you do? I know you said you took a year, but what was your game plan?
I started on page 1. I mean, and like I said, some of the stuff wasn't even in the right order, but I mean, I just started, getting it organized and reading it. And then any of the original investigators that were still around that I had access to, I would, "Hey, can I buy you lunch?" I would meet with them and talk with them. And, I just started, making, like I said, seeing who was still alive and what part of the country they were living in. I mean, I was frustrated. I wanted to get the case into grand jury sooner. Unfortunately, I just didn't, it wasn't meant to be, I guess, the powers to be at the time, I couldn't get it in, because I thought, right out of the gate, I said, I think an investigative grand jury. And truthfully, I didn't even know what an investigative grand jury was. Dave Rowan told me about that. But, after he explained it to me, I said, that I think that's the way to go on this. But it was like many times I felt completely overwhelmed, many times, because then you'd find another box. You'd think you've had all the boxes, and then the evidence custodian would say, "Hey, do you want that file back, on the Rowan case?" And I'm like, "Well, wait a minute, what file? I thought I had all the files." "Well, I found one behind a box on a shelf." And next thing you know, I got other reports I've never read before. Now I got to reorganize, I got to familiarize myself with them.
Chris, at some point, were you then digitizing the files? Was that your job?
Oh,
or could
yeah,
they bring someone else in?
I did. I scanned everything that we had. I scanned, and then I attached them. The computer system they were using at the time, I guess they still are, is called Cody. And I would put them in as attachments. And then moving forward, anything that I did proactively, I would just write in a narrative right into the system, and to try and memorialize everything. Because I thought, well, if I never solve it, or if something happens to me and I'm not around, maybe somebody else can pick it up. I didn't want it to just go back to the boxes and collect dust again.
I don't think the people out there listening, and there's thousands, tens and 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people that listen to this. They don't realize how special you are, the type of individual that it takes to have that kind of drive, that you never quit, you never give up. That is an amazing trait that not many people have, Chris.
Oh,
and you should be,
I appreciate that. I'm just stubborn.
On that. I hear you, Chris, but you could say what you want. But you know what? I was behind the curtain, maybe not in the same department with you, but I know what it takes
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, there's not many people like you. And our listeners should realize that the things that you did to make this thing move forward were unbelievable. If they only knew.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, I took a lot of flack too. I mean, there were what I call the naysayers, and
Ben Salem had a few.
Oh yeah, and I got into it with a few of them who shall remain nameless. Yeah, I even wrote about that in that book I wrote. And I equated it to a scene from the movie Goodfellas where Ray Liotta was kind of the way he was talking about, when the mob took over a restaurant and they didn't care how the restaurant did. They just wanted the vig every week. And he was like, the refrigerator broke, screw you, pay me. The electric bill's due, screw you, pay me. That was kind of my attitude. Like, the evidence is circumstantial. I don't care. I'm working it. The witnesses won't talk. I don't care. I'm working it. Like, despite whatever, I'm still working it, and, if I fail, I fail.
Good for you. Good for you.
That was kind of how it was.
Which you did. And Chris, you moved on to another case, which kind of brought us together after all these years with a Los Angeles connection to it.
Yes. Correct. Right around the same time that I had discovered the Rowan case, I was in that cast for a while. I remember after telling Lois Kurgan, like, I'm keeping this case, but I was like, what else you got? I started going through this filing cabinet, and I found this file, and I started going through it, and I found this picture, a big picture of a human skull. And I'm like, what the hell is this? And I start going through it, and I find the reports, and it was skeletal remains that were found in January of 1988 at the old Publicker Distillery on State Road, right along the Delaware River, just below Street Road. And
for the record, just for a timestamp here, I'd left Ben Salem 2 months before. I was at the FBI Academy in Quantico. Remember, I came home for the weekend and read about the body being found.
Okay.
I said, man, I hope our guys get on it. And then little did I know that it would be Chris who ultimately wound up resolving it. Continue.
I was, and so that case was it was very visual. I mean, there was so many pictures of the actual scene and seeing the skeleton, and then, and it turned out she was pregnant too. There were fetal bones found within her remains. And, her clothing, she had designer jeans. She had several pairs of shoes with her. There was a lot of extra clothing that were found with her. And she was found in the bottom of what I describe it as almost like an underground bunker, like a pump house. And you could see in the photographs these big pipes and valves. That it obviously had something to do with the distillery and the distilling process.
Which was long closed at that point, by the way.
It was, yes. And by the time I got involved, it was covered with dirt, because I would have loved to have gone back and seen it. But the rest of the buildings were gone, and the property had been, turned into another facility. So, I'm looking at this, and I look at the anthropology report, and, female, Caucasian, 5 feet 11, I think, no, 5'7" to 5'8", and, petite, 130 pounds, something. And I'm thinking 17 to 23 years old. And I'm thinking, how the hell can a young girl like this who's pregnant, just vanish, and nobody's looking for this girl? Going back, now this is in 2002, I'll go back 10 years when I first started, and I mentioned Frank Friel. So maybe it was around, I think it was 93 or 94 at that point, when Frank Bender did a forensic sculpture over the Jane Doe skull. And Frank was really good to me, and I would speak with him now and then. I remember one day he called me into his office for something, and that sculpture that Frank Bender created was on his desk. And I walked in, and I'm like, what is that? And he said—
to be clear, Chris, Frank Friel is the superintendent or the director of public safety at Ben Salem.
Correct. He was the director at the time.
Bender became a worldwide known forensic sculptor who solved a lot of cases over the years. And now you're talking about one in which he was involved.
Right.
So continue.
And Frank also a founding member of the VDOC Society.
That's right.
So I say to Frank Friel, I said, what is that? And Frank always used to address me. He always used to say, my boy. And when he was done talking to me, he said to me, he said, the question is, who is that, my boy? And I said, oh, who is it? And he said, that's the question. And then he explained to me that, it was created from the skull of a Jane Doe, and he explained the whole story. And I thought, but honestly, that, I went on to work patrol for years, and I forgot about it. And although Frank did explain to me back then what the VDOC Society was, and that I thought that was very interesting as well. But then, go back to, 10 years later when I find the case, and the case had been out there, it had been in the public's eye a lot, and I started thinking, maybe she's not from around here, So there was a federal grant called the President's DNA Initiative. I wanted to get the DNA profile from the remains into the CODIS system. I never went to any schools or training. I kind of just did my own. I used to do a lot of research, and just, I found out about CODIS, and I found out about this grant because we didn't have any money in the budget to do it. So I applied for the grant, and I was awarded the grant. Fortunately, the remains, we still had them in evidence. They were in a box. She had never been buried. She never went to a potter's field or, a Jane Doe grave. Long story short, I send the remains down to the University of North Texas, the Center for Human Identification, and they extract a profile and they get her into the CODIS system. So now I'm thinking, okay, good. Now if a family reference sample from a family missing somebody matches, we'll find out who she is. Well, she was in there, and time was going by, and, different missing persons were getting eliminated as being her, and I was getting frustrated again. And then I came across, so then, I went back to the well. What other cold cases do we have? And I found two cases about missing persons from Ben Salem, both young women. Tracy Bird, she vanished in the spring of '83, and then Jeanette Tamby, who vanished in the fall of '84. And I remember I had occasion, I had gone to a polygraph school down in Center City, Bill Fleischer's school, and he's friends with Frank Bender, and Frank Bender was there one day. So of course I cornered him and started speaking with him, and I told him about the case, and he told me, he said, I'm telling you, I think that is Jeanette Tamby. I think that girl is Jeanette Tamby. Okay. So I started, trying to find Jeanette Tamby. Well, I couldn't even find, it took me, I think it took like a month to find the Jeanette Tamby file, because again, it wasn't in the computer, and it was in the, that lost shelf somewhere, but I finally got it. And I wanted to get a family reference sample from her relatives, but I had found out that both of her parents were deceased. And for a hot second, I thought, well, maybe I can do an exhumation. But when I was told about the cost, I was like, we don't have the money for that, and you're never going to get a court order for it. So I knew she had a brother, and I was trying to find her brother, and I couldn't find him. And the FBI helped me find him. And he was in a town called Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, outside of Scranton. Mm-hmm. So I got a hold of him, and I went out to see him. It was the fall of, this is a few years later. This is like fall of '09. And showed him photographs of her clothing and jewelry, and he didn't recognize it, but he was happy to give me a buccal swab. So I got his DNA. I sent it down to CODIS, and I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a match. And a couple months go by, and I get a phone call from them, and they say, hey, you submitted a sample. Joseph Tamby was his name. And they said, it's a match. And right away, it's a match for my publisher, Jane Doe. No, it's a match for a Jane Doe homicide victim that was found in Buena Vista, New Jersey in August of 1986. And I'm like, what? So now I follow that. So I get in touch with the New Jersey State Police. We sit down, we compare notes. They had photographs of the victim, and as post-mortem as she was, I had a picture of Jeanette. You could tell it was her. But the medical examiner would not sign off on the death certificate because we only had a mitochondrial match, and he wanted a nuclear match. He wanted a parent, first degree relative. So I'm like, well, I don't know how we're going to get that. That mystery shelf will come into play again. I called Terry Lockman, who originally looked into the disappearance of Jeanette Tamby.
Former Ben Salem police officer. We were rookies together. He went to become Bucks County detective.
Right. And at that point, he is a Bucks County detective. So I call him and tell him. And he says to me, well, why don't you just give them the 2 vials of blood I took from Jeanette's mother back in 1985? And what vials of blood, Terry? I don't see a property receipt. I don't see anything about vials of blood. He says, I'll meet you tomorrow. He shows up the next day with his own copy of the case file, and he hands me a property receipt. And on the property receipt says, taken from Joy Tamby, 2 vials of blood. So I'm like, so I go down to the evidence custodian, Bill Thompson. Remember Bill Thompson? And
very well.
I said, I know it's been 28 years and we were in another building, but would you happen to have these 2 vials of blood? And don't you know, we had the blood. And so ship it off to the lab, and boom, we get a nuclear match, and I have found our missing person and identified their Jane Doe. So that was exciting, because that was the first time I had gotten like some forensic results like that. And that was great. I didn't have jurisdiction over the homicide, but at least we solved the missing person, and we named their Jane Doe. But then it still left me with the question, who's my girl? Who's the girl so that went on. A few years later, I was contacted by Kathy DeBono from Los Angeles, and she told me about Victor Palaeologus, and she explained.
Let's back up. Kathy was an actress.
She was
not in law enforcement.
Correct. Yeah, she's not in law enforcement at all. I should have said that.
And I actually, after I retired, I'm doing some work in Hollywood and LA, and I crossed paths with her.
Right.
And it may have been her or our mutual friend Jim Clemente,
right,
who said, "Hey, you're Ben Salem PD, right? Yeah, you know Chris McMullen? Yeah, I heard of him." And the story came together. So I want you to fill in.
Yeah, at that point, you and I had only met one time. We had met at the State Police Academy in Hershey years prior. But
that's right. That's right.
So Victor Palaeologus, had victimized, probably close to a dozen women out there in L.A., posing as a photographer or a casting agent to these young girls that were trying to make it in Hollywood. And and eventually he committed murder. He killed a girl named Christy Johnson. And what he would do is he would tell them to bring multiple sets of clothing to places where they were going to do a photo shoot. And sometimes they were secluded areas. Well, as you know, my Jane Doe had several pairs of shoes with her, couple blouses, almost like somebody had taken a duffel bag full of clothing and just dumped it on top of her body. Well, Kathy did a very deep dive on Victor and found out that in 1985, he lived in Ben Salem. And the anthropology report estimated that Jane Doe died around 1985. They estimated she'd been dead for about 3 years. So now I find out that he lived, in an apartment complex, maybe no more than 1.25 miles away from where the body was found. It's like circumstantially, it got my attention. I mean, it was, nobody's recognizing this girl. I'm striking out. And, I had that case on every unsolved case website I could think of. After Frank Bender's sculpture, I had the National Center for Missing Exploited Children did another sculpture. And then I took the skull to St. Mary's Hospital, where they donated a 3D CAT scan. And then with the CAT scan films, there was a computer generated rendering of what she might look like. And I was still getting, no leads at all. So when I heard about Victor and the fact that he lived here and the time frame was right and what his MO was, I did think that, I took a good hard look at him. Because I was thinking maybe she's not from around here. So that was how I got involved in that.
And interestingly, she was writing letters to him in prison.
She was.
She first saw him on trial in LA, and that was the guy that approached her to do a model shoot in a remote area. And she was basically ready to head there. And at the last minute, a friend said, "Yeah, this guy doesn't sound right."
Yeah.
And she realizes, a year later, watching this trial about this murdered woman, that could have been her.
Right.
And so that piqued her interest, and she did her deep dive, as you said. Ultimately, you got contacted, and but there's still more to the whole Publicker story from the body in 1988 that was found there, because you didn't give up.
No, and I always had, like I said, she was pregnant. I always had the theory, well, maybe the father of the child is the one that killed her, But so I didn't give up. And then I wanted to try phenotyping, which that was, that technique where you would get a DNA profile and it would literally get a computer rendered image of what the person looked like. And is actually very accurate, but I couldn't get the funds to do that. And then I wanted to do, as time went on, investigative genetic genealogy, and I wanted to do that. Now, so eventually, our director of public safety is Fred Harron, and he was able to get Bodie Labs to do that for us pro bono, because we had a contract with them to do other DNA work. So they did that for us pro bono. And they were able to get a DNA profile, and they were able to upload it, because that, we had a profile in CODIS, but that's not suitable to upload into a DNA genealogy database. You have to literally go back to the well and, drill the bones and get new DNA for what they call sequencing. And that's above my pay grade. I don't want to explain it improperly, but long story short, we were able to get her profile uploaded into some public databases. And, but we had like very distant hits on relatives, like 5th, 6th degree cousins. And so I was once again frustrated. And then I was contacted by a woman named Yolanda McClary. And Yolanda is a retired crime scene investigator from Las Vegas. And she had done a TV special on one of the true crime shows called the Jane Doe murders, where there were several Jane Does that were found, and through DNA genealogy, they had identified them. And she called me up and she said, "I saw your case. I'd like to help you." And I said, "Okay, absolutely." And so once Yolanda got involved, it was about 4 days of building the family tree. And I couldn't keep up with her. She'd call me, say, "Check your email." And I remember it was a Friday night, and I was working 4 to 12, and it was raining, and it was cold out. And she calls me up and she says, "Check your email. I sent you an email, and there's 2 names, Linda Todd and Joseph Todd. They're from Philadelphia. Your Jane Doe is their sister." And I said, "Wow, that's a pretty powerful statement." So, I had to do my homework on them, and I finally got a hold. So I couldn't get a hold of Linda, and I tried to get a hold of Joseph, but instead I reached his daughter. So I kind of went out on a limb. And I told her who I was, and I said, "This is going to be a very strange phone call." But I explained the case, and I told her everything that was going on. And I said, with all that being said, I said, "Did your father ever have a sister that vanished?" And she paused for a moment, and she said, "Yes, he did." And I said, "What was her name?" And she said, Lisa Todd. And I said, "All right, tell Dad he's got to call me." And about a half an hour later, her father called me, absolutely speechless. So I got his address, and myself and 2 other guys went down to see him. They lived 15 minutes from where she was found, and showed him the jewelry, and he recognized it. He told us, she was the oldest sister. He was like 13 when she vanished in October of 85. And I said, "Was she ever reported missing?" And he said, "Yeah." He said, "I remember the police being at our house, because after I found her name, I checked. She was not an NCIC." And so, I got DNA from him and the other sister, and we did direct comparisons, and they were first degree relatives. I had the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children do an offline NCIC search for me through purged records. And once we had her biographical information, we could do that, and found out that she was reported missing in October of 85 to the city of Philadelphia. She was 17 at the time. Her 18th birthday was in December. When she turned 18, they took her out of the system. And it was another not quite 3 years before we found her. But by then, there was nothing in NCI. The NCIC report even said she was pregnant. And had they left her in NCIC, she may have very well been identified in 88 when she was found. But instead, she stayed in our evidence room for another 33 years. And that
Of course, with only 3 years away from being identified, as you just mentioned, that would have made the case much easier to solve back then, too.
Much. And, I've always wondered, and it bothers me, like, how many other juveniles were listed as missing and taken out of the system when they were 18? Because there's still a lot of does out there. So that's kind of a sore spot for me. But yeah, and after identifying Lisa, I found out that she had a 2-year-old son when she disappeared. And he lived out of state, but I got a hold of him, and he flew up to see me, and he was really nice guy, and he's in his late 30s at that point. He was really grateful, and he he told me, he said, "You have no idea how much I appreciate this," because he literally thought his whole life that his mother abandoned him. Now, obviously, what happened to her wasn't good, but at least he knew that she didn't run off on him. Very nice guy. Very nice guy. And I have my theories about what happened to her, but I'm not going to comment on them right now because it's still open. So that was solving that. That was another something that made me quite happy.
Chris, I think the night you got that information from
I told you.
You texted me that you were so excited. I was so happy for you.
Yeah.
So I remember the case when it happened before you were even, I guess, a cop anyway.
I was in high school.
Yeah, and I'm in the FBI, so I have no jurisdiction. I'm out of Ben Salem, but I remember, boy, all the times I would drive my patrol car through there looking for lovers. Sometimes stolen cars would be dropped off.
Yeah.
Never knowing that down some pit, some old, whatever you described at pump station or something, there's a body, and you knew it would take this many years later. And I know there's a suspect that came up. We're not going to get into it. Easier said than done, but it's a good possibility that you actually talked to somebody and very close to that woman, and we'll see where that goes down the line.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So your book, tell us about your book.
So, I keep going back to Frank Friel, but, Frank wrote a book called Breaking the Mob because he was involved with the organized crime task force when he was in the city, and, talked about the Nicky Scarfo investigation and things like that. And I thought that was so neat that he had a career that was worthy of, writing about. And I always thought, well, you know what? When I retire, maybe I'll have something good to write about. The cases that we just talked about. Then there was another one, the Mary Beth Hodgkinson one. It was another Jane Doe. So, I just started writing one day, and it kind of, I must have 6 or 7 drafts of the book. But, and my book kind of, bounces around. It goes all the way back to 1977 when I talk about falling off the bike and the cops helped me up, all the way to the day I retired from Ben Salem. And it's somewhat autobiographical too. It's not just about the case. I really kind of like threw my life out there a little bit. So I took a chance. So far, people say it's a really good read. They're reading it and, they sit down and read it cover to cover. It's not, it's only 208 pages. So, any of the proceeds that I make from that, not the publisher, but that I make, are going to fund my nonprofit organization. So
give us the name of the book, how to reach it, website information.
The name of the book is 3 Decades Cold. And I chose that name because of all the cold cases I got involved. The average age of the case was 30 years. So that's where that came from. You can get it on Amazon. You can also get it from the publisher, Genius Book Publishing, under their true crime section. So it's gotten some good reviews, which made me happy.
And well deserved. And I've read parts of it too. You sent me parts of it, and very well written. You should be very proud of your career and the book you wrote. I know Ray has some questions because there's a whole Hollywood aspect to your life.
Yeah, but before we even get there, Chris, I know what you talked about. Well, let's go there since Jim mentioned it. There was a Dateline show, just so we know, that was on probably about the end of May. The third
I think it was like May 30th.
Yeah, May. It was
2024.
For
future listeners.
2024. And that case, what does that case relate to? I mean, you were talking about the LA connection with your Jane Doe.
Yeah, that was.
You hadn't identified that person yet.
Yeah, that it was. The fact that back before I even identified Lisa Todd, the public or Jane Doe body, that that due to Victor Palaeologus's method of operation, his modus operandi, and what he did to lure girls to secluded areas to assault them. After finding out that he lived in the area in Ben Salem around the same time she died in 1985. I thought to myself, maybe she could have been a victim of his because, we had information that he had attended a wedding in town. I thought maybe he brought a girl from out of town to the wedding and that's where she wound up, and I was very frustrated. I've always been one to think outside the box. At that time, I probably had 40 missing girls eliminated through CODIS as being her. And, I couldn't find anybody locally that, was missing somebody, at least that I was aware of, that could have been her. So I started thinking maybe she's from the West Coast, maybe she's not from around here. So when I was approached with the information on him, I gave it a good hard look.
Makes perfect sense.
It didn't turn out to be him, but boy, I was shocked when I'm sitting there watching that show, and I wound up seeing you in the previews. I'm thinking,
so was I. I didn't know it was going to be on that night. But
what the heck is he doing here? I mean, I think boom. But it was pretty interesting. But I would really like to talk about. I know there's some things you can't talk about in reference to your Hollywood connection, things of that nature. But I would really like to know more about your nonprofit.
So my nonprofit is called Cold Case Initiative, and it's a registered 501c3 charity. And, I had mentioned when we were talking that, a lot of the forensic testing that I needed to get done, it wasn't in the budget, and Ben Salem's a well-funded agency. But, one of the things I've learned over the years, and, as you guys know, to solve cold cases, the first thing you need to do is bring them up to current standards. What can we do now that we couldn't do back then? And obviously a big part of that is forensics and DNA and science, but all that costs money. So I started this nonprofit with the idea of just to raise money to help agencies offset the cost of forensic testing for whether it's a John or a Jane Doe, or it's a homicide case, and you may have DNA, that could possibly be from the doer. I mean, isn't that how they caught the guy that killed those kids in Ohio last year?
Yeah.
That's
right.
that sort of thing. Or, if, God forbid you have a serial sex offender going around. I mean, that technology can be used also to find a living, breathing offender still on the loose. So I thought, I was getting ready to retire, and, I'd be a liar if I said I don't miss being a detective. I still do, but this is kind of a way I can do it from the sidelines a little bit and help out. I mean, so far we have one success story under our skin. Of course, it was a Ben Salem case, but it was a guy that was found in the Delaware River back in October of 2003, and he was a John Doe, and he was never identified. So I knew that the medical examiner had kept a lot of DNA, so I knew we wouldn't have to do an exhumation. So I figured this is a perfect case to try. I don't have to exhume a body. I don't have to get a court order. All I had to do was ask Ben Salem, hey, can I help you with this? And of course they said yes. Through genealogy, we were able to identify him. And we actually, Ben Salem actually identified him 20 years to the day that he was found.
Wow.
He was found October 19th of 2003, and they contacted his family October 19th of 2023. So he was identified. His name was Edward Neese. And we have 3 other cases that we're actively working on right now. One of them's another Bucks County case, and one's from North Carolina, and one is from Cayuga County, Ohio. And they're all Does. One Jane Doe, one is unknown, and then one John Doe. But, I'm just trying to raise money to help solve cases. There's a lot of unsolved cases out there. And, like I said, we're North Carolina, Ohio. It doesn't have to be local to Pennsylvania. If we can afford it and we think, and they want our help, the biggest part is money, it's getting money. Now, after we solved that case last fall, it really did us a lot of good because we were on the news and a lot of donations came in, which really made me happy because we were struggling.
Well, with that, Chris, if our listeners, I'm sure they would love to donate to this Cold Case Initiative. How do they go about doing that?
You can go to our website, www.coldcaseinitiative.org. And, there's QR codes there, and, you can PayPal, Venmo, and, anything you donate is certainly tax deductible and very much appreciated.
And may just help solve a homicide. If you're into true crime podcasts, TV shows, maybe chip in $5, $10, $20 maybe, and you'd actually be an indirect part of getting some of these cases solved.
Yeah, and
that's a great thing you're doing, Chris.
Thank you. And all the
Every
cases
dollar makes a difference.
I'm sorry?
Every dollar makes a difference.
Absolutely. And every case we're working on is featured on the website. So, you know, people can see it. They can see where we're at and what we're doing. And it talks about the other cases that, you know, we've had success with, or the cases I had, the same type of cases I had success with, you know, just to show, you know, what we want to do. But yeah, you know, I'm confident that by the end of the year, we might have 3 or 4 solves because we're making progress on them.
I want to throw this out real quick. And I want our audience to realize this, and you tell me your thoughts on this, Chris. When you talk about these cold cases, and just you can add to this, you can say true, say it's not true, but is there any better time than the present in which cold cases can be solved?
Absolutely not. This is the time. I mean,
and why?
Because technology and science is kicking the door in. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
And you know what I always say from the behavioralist perspective, agencies that were very strong 20 or 30 years ago, they're not the same now, 2 to 3 decades later. So the DNA is the best part you want to get. Mm-hmm. And I've said this before on the air, but the tough guy who would intimidate people not to tell others that he was with that girl on a Saturday night, she disappeared, winds up dead. That guy is not so tough anymore.
He's not so tough anymore. Right.
And he has his own issues. And people are saying, well, all right, well, I know this guy is, you know, he limps around. He's been drinking all his life, smoking. Here's the information I've been holding for 25 years. Yeah. So, again, give me DNA evidence anytime first. But after that, you get some people. You still need linkage to tie in those particular people. And that's where this type of source information comes through. Because the tough guy from the 1990s, he may not be so tough right now.
Absolutely. And that's why an investigative grand jury is so effective, because a lot of times they don't remember their lies and they contradict themselves. So.
Let's wind this up on a little bit of a more cheerful note. And if anyone's been watching this, and if you've only been watching, Chris is not a bad looking guy, and he's done some acting work. And in fact, of all the people out there, you're most linked with Alec Baldwin, because you were his substitute on a few different movies, right?
I was his stand-in for about a week on the film The Departed. We filmed up in Brooklyn, and I was his stand-in.
Tell us what a stand-in does.
Hollywood parlance. That was the first time I'd done that. You know, a stand-in is, you know, whoever the actor is, they want somebody that physically, you know, resembles them, you know, both in appearance, but, you know, stature and whatnot. And they'll dress you in the same wardrobe that actor is wearing for the day. But that actor doesn't want to stand there or sit there for 25 minutes while they get the lighting right. So that's what a stand-in does. And, you know, you may wind up, you know, walking around a room saying the same lines because they want to see, you know, your movement and whatnot. And another actor may come along and want to rehearse the scene, and you may do that with him or her. It's pretty neat though, because when they call you team 2, and then actually, you know, the primary actors are team 1, when they say team 2 out, team 1 in, like when I was done, you know, when they called me out, I literally would sit down like next to Martin Scorsese and watch through the monitor while they would film it. And that was pretty neat. You know, I'd never gone to film school, but that was a neat experience, you know, and everybody was really nice. So, you know, I had a good time up there.
And you've had a few acting gigs. Was it NCIS about a year or 2 ago? You played a firefighter, I think.
It was Law and Order SVU. Yeah. I played a firefighter in an episode and had a few lines. That was fun.
Excellent work. You should have gotten an Emmy for that.
And then I was typecast as a cop. That was a big stretch, but I played a cop in the movie Limitless. I had a scene with Bradley Cooper. That was fun.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah. And then there's a show on Apple TV. It's an M. Night Shyamalan series called Servant. And I played an officer in that as well, had a few lines. So, you know, I've had some fun with that. I enjoy doing that.
Anything active coming up? Besides the true crime, well, you're doing a podcast now, but I mean, TV shows, anything else where acting is involved or standing in?
Not at the moment, but, you know, I'm always hoping that my agent will call and say they have an audition for me, but I haven't had anything lately. But that doesn't mean I've had a couple auditions in the last year. I just unfortunately didn't book anything. So, you know, when I'm offered an audition, I usually drop everything and jump at it. So, you know, hopefully I'll get another shot. I had auditioned a while back for that miniseries on HBO, Mayor of Easttown, which I thought was great. And I actually know several of the local actors that were in it, so I was happy to see them. But it's always a bummer when you see the role you auditioned for that you didn't get. You see somebody else do it. But, it's fun, and, it doesn't really matter your age. So, I can keep doing it. The older I get, doesn't matter.
Well, and Chris, I did my best back in 2017 to get you a part.
That's right.
In Manhunt Unabomber, along with my niece.
I appreciate
Denise
that.
McDonald. And we tried, but they were filming in Atlanta, and they had a decent budget, but I don't think they wanted to fly people in from Philly, or it would have cost you to go there for a week, put yourself up, and they got local actors in that regard. So I did try to enhance your acting career. And maybe if you did get 3 or 4 lines in that miniseries, you wouldn't have been doing any of this stuff today on the podcast. So you'd be too important to talk to us.
That could be true.
Chris, Fitz has had a couple offers, but didn't quite work out. They said he had more of a face for radio.
There you go. There you go. Well, Ray, and you for the written communication. So we'll leave it at that. Chris, thank you for your time. You gave us about 90 minutes, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
You're doing great work out there, and I'm glad we shared the same police department, even though a few years apart in that regard.
Agreed.
Ben Salem has produced a lot of good officers, investigators, management over the years, and you're definitely on the honor roll in that regard.
Well, thank you.
Ray, any final lines here before I sign us out?
No, we don't. I don't have anything. Any fan shout outs? You want to shout out to anybody, Chris?
Probably, but I can't think of who it would be at the moment, so I'll just thank you guys. But that's about
Sure
it.
Sure thing.
Well, everyone else, follow us on coldredpodcast.com, all the various Cold Red social media sites. I want to thank our 2 producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling. And we'll be back again with another interesting guest, just like Chris was tonight. Tune in next time. So again, Chris, thanks for your time and your effort here. And Ray, always good working with you.
Same here, Fitz. Thank you, Chris.
All right, guys, take care.